The envelope. They wanted me to fear. There are moments that split your life into two parts: the life you thought you understood, and the life that begins after the truth finally arrives. Mine started on a humid Saturday afternoon in July. Every year, my family gathered at my father's estate for what he proudly called Legacy Day. It sounded like a celebration, but it never felt like one. It was a performance, a carefully rehearsed ritual where my father reminded everyone that success belonged to those who earned his approval. I never seemed to qualify. The dining room overlooked a perfectly trimmed lawn where gardeners worked in silence beneath the summer sun. Crystal glasses reflected golden light across the polished mahogany table. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked perfect. Appearances meant everything to my father. Reality rarely received the same attention. When I walked into the room, my mother looked up briefly before returning to her tea. My younger brother, Andre, leaned comfortably against the fireplace, wearing the confident smile of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged. I greeted everyone politely. No one stood to hug me. That wasn't unusual. My father waited until the grandfather clock struck exactly 2:00 p.m. before clearing his throat. "Now that everyone is here," he said, "we can begin." A housekeeper entered carrying a silver tray. Resting on it was a single ivory envelope, sealed with dark blue wax. Every July one arrived. No return address, no explanation, only my father's name written in elegant handwriting. He always claimed they came from an old family friend. No one ever questioned him, at least not out loud. He carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The room became silent enough to hear the air conditioner humming through the ceiling vents. My father read silently for several moments before smiling. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile he wore whenever someone else was about to lose. "Interesting," he said. My brother leaned forward. "What is it?" Father folded the letter. "It confirms a decision I've already made." He looked direct. "Beneficiary of this family's estate." No one reacted, almost as though they had expected it. "The estate is currently valued at $4,782,000, he continued calmly. "Your share has been permanently removed." My mother lowered her eyes. Andre exhaled through his nose, hiding a grin that wasn't nearly as subtle as he imagined. Across the table sat my father's newest business associate, a wealthy investor named Charles Whitmore. He adjusted his cufflinks and watched me with open curiosity, as though waiting for an emotional outburst. He didn't know me. I simply folded my hands in my lap. My father frowned slightly. "No questions? I heard what you said. And, if that's your decision, I understand." Charles chuckled softly. I expected more of a fight. I turned toward him. So did everyone else. Silence settled over the room again. My father interpreted my calmness as surrender. He couldn't have been more mistaken. The truth was much simpler. I had stopped measuring my worth by his approval a long time ago. He just hadn't noticed. My mother finally spoke. "We only want what's best for the family." I looked at her gently. I've heard those words my entire life. She didn't answer, because there was nothing left to say. Andre broke the tension with an easy laugh. "Maybe this will motivate you." I smiled politely. "I've always been motivated." Charles leaned back in his chair. "Business isn't personal," he said. "Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made." "I agree," I replied. His confident expression suggested he believed the conversation had ended in his favor. He had absolutely no idea how much that assumption would cost him. My father tapped the envelope against the table. "This letter settles everything." I looked at the folded paper one last time. No, I thought, it doesn't, because I had noticed something no one else had. As father folded the pages, a second sheet remained tucked inside the envelope. He never saw it. Neither did anyone else. But I recognized the corner of the page. Someone had placed an additional document inside. Deliberately, I remained perfectly still. There would be a better time to ask about it. a better time to let the truth reveal itself. People blinded by victory often stop paying attention. That afternoon, everyone believed I had lost my place in the family. They smiled. They relaxed. They celebrated far too early. They had absolutely no idea the envelope still held one final secret, and secrets have a remarkable way of choosing the perfect moment to speak. Love that always came with conditions. There are people who remember childhood by birthdays, family vacations, or photographs hanging in a hallway. I remember mine by the moments I realized love in my house always came with conditions. The older I became, the clearer those conditions appeared. I was expected to work harder, speak softer, forgive faster, and celebrate everyone else's victories while pretending my own never mattered. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking why. I already knew the answer. Growing up as the darkest-skinned daughter in my family meant people often complimented my intelligence before they ever mentioned my smile. My relatives would run their fingers through my younger brother Marcus's lighter curls and call him the handsome one. When they looked at me, they talked about how strong I was. Strong. It sounded like praise. It never felt like it. My father believed appearances opened doors long before character ever could. He built his business around wealthy circles, where image mattered almost as much as money. Every dinner, every charity event, every country club invitation was another opportunity to prove our family belonged among people with influence. I was rarely part of that picture. Marcus always stood beside him. "I want people to remember confidence," my father once said while adjusting Marcus's expensive suit jacket. Then he glanced toward me. "And professionalism matters more than attention." I understood exactly what he meant. He never had to explain it. When Marcus graduated from college with average grades, my father surprised him with a brand new luxury SUV. When I graduated at the top of my law school class, I received a firm handshake. "I'm proud of your discipline," he told me. That was all. No celebration, no family dinner, no photographs. Just another achievement quietly placed on a shelf where nobody intended to look. I told myself it didn't hurt anymore. That was never completely true. My mother preferred quieter methods. She rarely criticized me directly. Instead, she wrapped every request inside guilt. "Your brother has so much pressure on him. You've always been the responsible one. Families make sacrifices." Those words became her favorite tools. Whenever Marcus made another careless financial decision, I was expected to help. Whenever my father needed legal paperwork reviewed without paying outside counsel, I stayed late. Whenever family conflicts appeared, somehow I became responsible for keeping everyone together. They called it loyalty. Looking back now, I recognize it as convenience. The more successful I became as an attorney specializing in corporate compliance and financial litigation, the less my family seemed interested in my accomplishments. Success only mattered when it belonged to someone else. Outside our home, clients respected my judgment. Judges listened carefully when I argued. Executives trusted me with multi-million-dollar negotiations. Inside my parents' house, I was still treated like the child who should remain grateful simply for being invited into the room. The contradiction became exhausting. Then Richard Collins entered our lives. He arrived wearing confidence, like it had been tailored specifically for him. Expensive watches, polished shoes, perfect smiles, and stories about investment opportunities followed him everywhere. My father admired him almost immediately. Richard represented everything my father wanted to become: wealth, status, connections, power. The first time Richard met me, he extended his hand with a smile that never reached his eyes. "So you're the attorney I've heard about." "I am," I answered. "Corporate law, mostly corporate governance and financial compliance." He laughed softly. "That sounds adorable." The room joined his laughter. I didn't. Richard leaned slightly closer. "Real money isn't made reading contracts. It's made writing the rules." His words floated across the room like harmless conversation. They weren't harmless. They were calculated. I smiled politely. Rules tend to matter when people stop following them. His expression changed for only a second. Then the smile returned. I suppose we'll see. That became our relationship. Every gathering included another subtle insult, another joke, another reminder that he believed I occupied a lower place in the world. He praised Marcus constantly. He praised my father even more. When conversations shifted toward my career, Richard always found a way to reduce it. You work too hard. You'll never build real wealth billing hours. Successful people hire attorneys. They don't become them. Each sentence landed exactly where he intended. My father usually nodded in agreement. My mother stayed silent. Marcus laughed, because Richard's approval had become more valuable than my respect. What none of them realized was something I noticed almost immediately. Richard answered simple financial questions with rehearsed confidence, but avoided detailed discussions about regulatory compliance. Whenever I mentioned fiduciary duties or disclosure requirements, he redirected the conversation. Most people missed those moments. Lawyers don't. Small inconsistencies often become very expensive truths. I never confronted him. There wasn't enough evidence, only instincts. Years of legal practice had taught me one lesson above all others: never accuse someone before they're ready to expose themselves. Patience wins cases, emotion loses them. So I watched, I listened, I remembered every conversation, every signature, every unexplained transfer mentioned during family dinners, every strange reaction whenever legal documents appeared. They believed I wasn't paying attention. That assumption would become their greatest mistake. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't admit then. My family never underestimated my intelligence. They underestimated my silence. Silence allowed people to reveal themselves. Silence made arrogant people comfortable. Silence gathered evidence. Most importantly, silence kept my emotions from becoming someone else's weapon. That evening, after another exhausting family dinner, I drove home beneath a sky painted with fading shades of orange and deep blue. The city lights reflected across my windshield, while Richard's dismissive smile replayed inside my mind. I wasn't angry. I was curious, because something about him refused to fit together. I unlocked my apartment door, placed my briefcase beside the kitchen counter, and removed my heels with a slow breath. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, very different from the house I had just left. Then my phone vibrated across the countertop. I glanced at the screen. 10:47 p.m. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in months. My mentor, Judge Evelyn Brooks. I answered. Naomi, she said calmly. It's time. Everything changed. The flash drive. My mentor protected Judge Evelyn Brooks, never wasted words. When I arrived outside her historic brick townhouse the following morning, the clock on my dashboard read 8:02 a.m. sharp. The air carried the scent of fresh rain, and the sidewalks still glistened beneath a pale summer sun. She believed punctuality revealed character long before conversation ever could. And after mentoring me for nearly a decade, I knew better than to arrive even a minute late. She opened the door before I could knock. You came alone, she said. I always do. A faint smile crossed her face. Good. Come inside. Her study looked exactly as I remembered. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves framed the room. Leather-bound law reports filled every shelf, and framed photographs of landmark court ceremonies lined the walls. The scent of old paper, polished oak, and freshly brewed coffee settled over me like a familiar memory. Judge Brooks closed the door quietly behind us. I didn't ask you here for coffee, she said. I didn't think you did. She walked toward an antique desk positioned beneath the window and unlocked its center drawer with a brass key she wore around her neck. From inside, she removed a thick manila envelope, sealed with dark blue wax. My heartbeat slowed instead of quickened. Years in corporate law had trained me to recognize moments when emotions could become expensive mistakes. She placed the envelope in front of me, but kept one hand resting on it. "Before you open this," she said, "I need you to understand something." I waited. "This isn't about revenge, I know. It's about protecting a legacy that someone tried to steal." Those words settled heavily between us. She finally released the envelope. Inside rested 4 items: an original trust agreement, a small encrypted flash drive, several forensic accounting reports, a folder containing signed property deeds. I carefully lifted the trust agreement first. The paper had yellowed with age, but every signature remained perfectly preserved. My grandfather's name stood boldly across the final page. I hadn't seen his handwriting since the day we buried him. For a brief moment, I wasn't an attorney. I was simply his granddaughter again. Judge Brooks watched me quietly. "He trusted you more than anyone. I wish he'd told me." "He couldn't." I looked up. "What do you mean?" She folded her hands together. "Because he believed someone inside your own family would eventually betray everything he built." Silence filled the room. Outside, distant traffic drifted through the open window. Inside, every word suddenly felt heavier. I turned another page. The trust contained provisions I had never heard discussed: control of several commercial properties, investment accounts, voting authority over family holdings. Most importantly, a succession clause. If evidence of fraud, coercion, or unlawful transfer ever emerged, authority automatically transferred to a single trustee. My name. I looked at Judge Brooks. "He appointed me?" "He did, years ago. But why keep it secret?" "Because he feared people would challenge the documents before the evidence revealed itself." I slowly reached for the flash drive. It carried no label, only a handwritten letter for Naomi. "When the truth is ready." Judge Brooks handed me a laptop already waiting on the desk. "I believe it's ready." The drive required multiple passwords before finally opening. Folders appeared one after another: bank statements, email archives, property valuations, corporate transfer records. Everything had been meticulously organized. The first file displayed a timeline stretching back nearly 7 years. Richard Collins's name appeared repeatedly. So did my father's. At first glance, everything looked legitimate: loan agreements, investment partnerships, development contracts. But legal training teaches you to read what others ignore. One signature had been digitally altered. A disclosure statement had disappeared from an amended filing. Several real estate transfers moved through shell companies before returning under different ownership. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Richard hadn't invested in our family's future. He had been positioning himself to quietly own it. "He manipulated the valuations," I whispered. Judge Brooks nodded. "And your father signed almost everything." "Did he know?" "I believe he was blinded by ambition." I closed my eyes briefly. My father had always wanted acceptance among powerful people. Richard had simply learned how to exploit that desire. The accounting reports confirmed every suspicion. Assets had been shifted, equity diluted, debt strategically assigned to family-controlled entities, while profits quietly flowed elsewhere. The fraud wasn't careless. It was patient, sophisticated, calculated. Exactly the kind of scheme that survives because everyone assumes successful people must also be honest. What they didn't know, I said softly, was that every document they trusted had already become evidence against them. Judge Brooks smiled for the first time. "Now you're thinking like your grandfather." She reached into another folder and removed several notarized property deeds. These were never recorded publicly. I examined them carefully. Every signature was authentic. Every legal description matched the trust. Hidden within those pages were the family's most valuable properties, assets Richard believed he would eventually control. He had absolutely no idea they had been legally protected years before he entered our lives. "He can delay lawsuits," I said. "He can intimidate witnesses. He can manipulate public opinion. But he can't rewrite signed legal instruments." Judge Brooks leaned forward. "And that's why your grandfather chose you." She looked directly into my eyes. "He knew everyone else would react emotionally." "You won't." I remained silent. Not because I lacked emotion, because she was right. The hurt was still there, the disappointment, the years spent trying to earn affection that always seemed reserved for someone else. But another feeling had quietly replaced them: clarity. For years, I believed I needed my family's approval to prove my worth. Now I held documents proving my worth had never depended on their opinions. It had been protected long before they ever questioned it. I carefully placed every document back into the envelope. I'll do this legally. I expected nothing less. I won't destroy them. Judge Brooks gave a slow nod. No, you'll allow the truth to do that. I left her home carrying the envelope securely beneath my arm. The summer breeze felt different against my face, lighter, steadier. For the first time since childhood, I wasn't walking toward my family hoping they would finally choose me. I was walking toward the truth. And for the first time in my life, I stopped wanting their love, the woman I chose to become. The first thing I noticed after closing my apartment door was the silence. No forced smiles, no careful conversations, no reminders that I was expected to earn love that should have been freely given. I placed the thick folder on my dining table and stood there for several minutes without touching it. The city lights filtered through the living room window, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Somewhere below, traffic hummed through the streets. But inside my apartment, the world felt perfectly still. For years I had filled every quiet moment with work, because work was predictable. Contracts made sense. Laws had structure. Evidence mattered. Families were different. Families could rewrite history while looking directly into your eyes. I slowly removed my blazer and draped it over the back of a chair. My reflection stared back from the dark kitchen window. I looked composed, but I could finally admit something I had hidden even from myself. I was grieving, not because I had lost my family, because I had finally accepted that I had never truly had them. That realization hurt more than any insult Richard had ever delivered. It hurt more than every time my father praised my brother while ignoring me. It hurt more than every conversation my mother ended with, "Do this for the family." I sat on the floor beside the coffee table, allowing every memory to surface without fighting it. I remembered birthday parties where my brother opened twice as many gifts. I remembered family photographs where I was always asked to stand slightly behind everyone else. I remembered graduating from law school with honors and driving home alone, because everyone else had been too busy attending one of my brother's networking events. I had spent years believing that if I achieved enough, worked hard enough, remained patient enough, someone would finally look at me with unconditional pride. That day never came. A tear slid down my cheek before I wiped it away. I didn't cry because they had rejected me. I cried because I had spent so many years rejecting myself while trying to earn their approval. The room grew darker as evening settled over the city. For the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to mourn the family I wished I had, instead of pretending the one I had was enough. That night became a funeral, not for people, for expectations. Around midnight, I stood and walked into the bathroom. Cold water splashed across my face. When I looked into the mirror again, something had changed. The sadness remained, but it was no longer leading me. A different emotion had quietly taken its place. Clarity. I spoke aloud, even though no one else could hear me. "I'm done asking people to see my value." The words sounded unfamiliar. They also sounded true. I returned to the dining table and opened my laptop. The documents Judge Brooks had entrusted to me rested neatly beside the keyboard. Instead of replaying old arguments in my mind, I opened a blank legal memorandum. If Richard Collins had committed financial fraud, emotional reactions would accomplish nothing. Documentation would. Evidence would. Procedure would. I began creating a timeline. Every suspicious property transfer, every corporate filing, every unexplained investment, every signature that deserved closer examination. Hours passed without my noticing. Coffee replaced tears. Focus replaced disappointment. By 2 o'clock in the morning, my apartment looked less like a home and more like a litigation war room. Documents covered the table. Sticky notes marked important dates. Legal pads filled with observations surrounded my laptop. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was building a case. The difference mattered. Revenge seeks pain. Justice seeks truth. Truth leaves records. The next morning, I contacted a forensic accountant I had trusted for years. I need discretion, I told him. You'll have it. I also need complete financial reconstruction. When? Immediately. He never asked unnecessary questions. Professionals rarely do. Later that afternoon, I reached out to a former federal investigator whose integrity had earned my respect during a corporate corruption case years earlier. I may have evidence involving fraudulent asset transfers, I said carefully. Are you certain? I'm certain enough to begin verifying everything. His answer came without hesitation. I'll assemble a review team. One by one, I quietly built the network I would need: a financial analyst, a property records specialist, an expert in digital document authentication. Each person received only the information necessary to complete their portion of the work. No one knew the entire picture, not yet. Meanwhile, my family assumed I had withdrawn because I was embarrassed. They thought the July letter had finally broken my confidence. They had absolutely no idea it had strengthened my resolve. Richard continued attending charity dinners. My father continued celebrating new business ventures. Marcus continued posting photographs of luxury vacations across social media. From the outside, their lives appeared untouched. Inside my apartment, every illusion they depended upon was slowly unraveling. Evidence has remarkable patience. Unlike anger, it never grows tired. It simply waits until the right courtroom. Several days later, my phone buzzed with the first completed forensic report. I opened the encrypted file and read every page carefully. The preliminary findings confirmed exactly what I had suspected. The financial irregularities were not isolated mistakes. They formed a deliberate pattern. Someone had manipulated ownership structures over several years while disguising the transfers through layers of corporate entities. The deeper we looked, the clearer the picture became. Richard hadn't simply taken advantage of my father's ambition. He had engineered an entire system designed to reward greed and punish trust. My father still believed Richard was his greatest ally. He couldn't see that he had become his most valuable target. I closed the report and looked toward the sunrise stretching across the city skyline. Golden light filled my apartment. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt prepared. The woman who had spent her life begging silently for acceptance no longer existed. In her place stood someone far more dangerous. A woman who understood that patience, discipline, and truth could accomplish what anger never could. They believed I was disappearing. I was actually preparing the stage. Every lie needs an audience. People often believe the loudest person in the room is the most powerful. My career taught me the opposite. The most dangerous person is usually the one taking notes. The ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, while a jazz quartet played softly near the stage. Waiters moved between tables carrying silver trays, and every conversation sounded polished enough to belong in a magazine. Wealth has a particular rhythm. It laughs confidently, shakes hands firmly, and assumes tomorrow will look exactly like today. I sat near the back of the room, not because anyone told me to, because I wanted to watch. The keynote speaker praised the company's remarkable growth before inviting the celebrated investor of the evening onto the stage. The applause arrived instantly. He smiled as though success belonged exclusively to him. I've always believed business rewards courage, he said, adjusting his cufflinks. Some people build companies, others spend their lives reviewing paperwork. Several guests laughed. His eyes settled on me. I suppose every organization needs lawyers. Someone has to explain why successful people can't move as quickly as they'd like. More laughter. I smiled politely and sipped my water. I didn't answer. They mistook my silence for embarrassment. It wasn't. It was discipline. Months earlier, I would have gone home replaying every word in my head. Now I simply observed who laughed, who looked uncomfortable, and who quietly avoided meeting my eyes. Every reaction told its own story. After the presentation, executives gathered in small circles, discussing acquisitions, commercial properties, and future investments. I wandered through the room, greeting familiar faces without mentioning the questions already forming in my mind. One executive approached me. I hope you didn't take those comments personally. I didn't. You're calmer than most people. I've learned that facts usually outlast opinions. He nodded thoughtfully. I like that. The evening continued. Across the room, I noticed two longtime employees speaking quietly beside a window. Their expressions carried none of the celebration filling the ballroom. One of them recognized me. "Can we speak privately?" We stepped into the hallway. His voice dropped. "Our retirement accounts have been delayed again." "How long?" "3 months." His colleague folded his arms. "They keep telling us it's temporary." I listened carefully. Neither man wanted sympathy. They wanted answers. "I can't promise anything tonight," I said, "but I can promise I'll remember what you've told me." They thanked me before returning inside. As I watched them leave, I realized expensive suits often hide ordinary suffering. The headlines praised record profits. Employees worried about retirement. Later that week, I attended a neighborhood meeting where several elderly homeowners discussed rising legal fees connected to a redevelopment project. One woman unfolded a stack of documents with trembling hands. "My husband bought this house 40 years ago." She looked at me hopefully. "I don't understand any of this." I reviewed the paperwork. The language was complicated, too complicated. Contracts should explain obligations. These seemed designed to confuse them. "They told us signing would protect our neighborhood," another resident said quietly. Instead, it had placed their homes at risk. I couldn't solve everything that afternoon, but I could point them toward legal aid and explain what questions they should ask before signing anything else. Sometimes justice begins with information, not confrontation. Days passed. Public praise for the company continued. Awards, interviews, charity photographs. From the outside, everything appeared flawless. Behind closed doors, more inconsistencies surfaced. Meeting minutes didn't match public statements. Financial summaries raised questions. Small details refused to fit together. Patterns matter, especially when people believe no one is paying attention. I kept copies of publicly available records. I documented dates, I organized notes, I never announced what I was doing. Confidence often encourages careless people to create their own evidence. One afternoon, the celebrated investor crossed paths with me after another board meeting. He smiled confidently. "Still chasing paperwork?" "I enjoy understanding how things work," he chuckled. Success isn't found in filing cabinets. Sometimes accountability is. For just a moment, his smile faded. Then, it returned. "I suppose we'll see." "Eventually," I replied. We walked in opposite directions. He believed he'd won another conversation. I knew conversations rarely decide outcomes. Actions do. A week later, an elegant cream-colored envelope arrived at my office. Inside was an invitation embossed in gold lettering. An exclusive charity gala. Business leaders, community figures, press, everyone important would be there. I folded the invitation carefully and slipped it into my briefcase. They believed they were inviting another spectator. I intended to be something else entirely. They invited me to the gala, thinking they controlled the room. I arrived 10 minutes before the reception officially began, just as the ballroom staff finished lighting the last row of crystal chandeliers. Their reflections shimmered across polished marble floors, turning the room into a sea of gold and glass. Conversations floated through the air with practiced confidence, accompanied by the soft notes of a string quartet and the quiet clink of crystal glasses. Wealth always had its own soundtrack. I wore a tailored black suit with silver cufflinks and a single pearl pin on the lapel. It wasn't chosen to impress anyone. It reminded me that discipline could be stronger than emotion. Looking into the mirrored wall near the entrance, I barely recognized the person staring back. Months earlier, I would have searched the room hoping someone from my family might finally see me differently. That woman no longer existed. I accepted a glass of sparkling water and walked calmly through the crowd, greeting familiar attorneys, nonprofit directors, financial regulators, and business leaders. Every handshake felt ordinary. That was exactly what I wanted. Across the ballroom, the evening's featured speaker laughed loudly. Victor Langford had mastered the performance of success. Every story painted him as a visionary investor who transformed struggling businesses into thriving enterprises. Newspapers praised his generosity, Television hosts admired his confidence. People saw the polished version because they had never examined the paperwork behind it. I had. He noticed me within minutes. Well, he called loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Our favorite compliance attorney made it. Several people smiled politely. I returned the greeting with a small nod. Victor walked closer, adjusting his tuxedo jacket. Still reading contracts while the rest of us build companies? A few guests laughed. I simply sipped my water. He continued. You know what's funny about lawyers? They always think paperwork beats vision. His audience grew. Successful people love watching confidence. They mistake it for competence. I'm surprised you're here, he added. Events like this are usually reserved for decision makers. Another wave of laughter. I remained still. The silence unsettled him more than any reply could have. What? He asked with a grin. Nothing to say tonight? I looked at him for a brief moment before placing my glass on a nearby table. Please, he continued, spreading his arms dramatically, tell everyone how dangerous spreadsheets are. More laughter. Then, nothing. I simply stood there. The room slowly became quieter. People shifted awkwardly. Victor glanced around, expecting someone else to rescue the moment. No one did. He filled the silence himself. See? He laughed nervously. That's exactly the problem with lawyers. They're always waiting for permission. I didn't move. He kept talking. I've negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions. People like me create opportunities. People like you slow them down. Still, I said nothing. A journalist lowered her notebook. One executive quietly folded his arms. The silence had become impossible to ignore. Victor smiled again, though this time it looked strained. You think staring at me changes reality? No answer. It doesn't matter what documents anyone finds. Several heads turned. He hadn't intended to say that. He realized it immediately. I mean, he corrected himself quickly. Business records are complicated. No one laughed. He continued anyway. You can make any transaction look suspicious if you don't understand corporate structures. The words spilled faster now. I've moved assets between holding companies for years. He stopped. Too late. A banking executive raised an eyebrow. Victor swallowed. I mean, perfectly legal transfers. His confidence began cracking. He looked directly at me. Say something. I didn't. My silence forced him to keep filling the empty space. You have no idea how these deals work. Another mistake. They were all approved. He hesitated. Most of them. The room had become completely still. Conversations throughout the ballroom faded away. Even the musicians stopped playing. I slowly reached into my leather portfolio. Without speaking, I placed a sealed envelope on the nearest conference table, then another, then a small encrypted flash drive. Nothing more. Guests leaned forward. Victor frowned. What is this? I remained silent. He picked up the envelope. His smile disappeared as he recognized several familiar signatures. His breathing changed. You weren't supposed to have these. Another sentence he immediately regretted. He looked around the room. No one understands these documents. Still, I said nothing. An older judge quietly removed his reading glasses and examined the first page. A financial regulator stepped closer. One of the journalists began writing rapidly. Victor reached toward the papers. They're confidential. No one handed them back. He laughed again. This time it sounded forced. These don't prove anything. He looked directly at me. You've been digging through private files? I finally spoke. One sentence. They became public evidence yesterday. Nothing else. His face lost its color. What? The proper agencies received authenticated copies. The room remained silent. He looked toward the ballroom entrance. Several men and women wearing dark business attire entered calmly, displaying official credentials to event security before walking inside. No one rushed. No one raised a voice. Professional investigations rarely resemble television dramas. They move with patience, precision, confidence. Victor took one slow step backward. My father, standing across the room, watched the investigators approach with visible confusion. "What is this?" he asked. One investigator addressed him politely. "We'll need to speak with you regarding several corporate filings requiring clarification." My father looked toward Victor. "You told me everything had been reviewed." Victor answered too quickly. "It has." The lead investigator opened a folder. "Our preliminary findings suggest otherwise." My father stared at several documents. His expression slowly changed. Recognition, confusion, regret. "I signed these," he whispered. He flipped another page. "I never approved." His voice disappeared. He simply hadn't understood what he signed. Victor interrupted. "Those amendments were standard." The investigator looked up. "So you acknowledge preparing them?" Silence. For the first time all evening, Victor had nothing to say. He glanced toward the exits. 2 security officers had quietly positioned themselves nearby. There was nowhere to go. The lead investigator spoke calmly. "We'll continue this discussion downtown." Victor tried one final smile. "This is all a misunderstanding." The investigator nodded. "You're welcome to explain everything." I watched without satisfaction. Only clarity. Months earlier, I wanted people to believe me. Now I no longer needed belief. Facts had arrived on their own. No speech could compete with evidence. No insult could erase signed records. No performance could outshine the truth. The ballroom remained perfectly still as the investigators escorted Victor toward the exit. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. Sometimes justice is almost silent. As the doors opened, every conversation stopped. The only sound left in the room was the quiet click of handcuffs closing around his wrists. The courthouse steps looked different in autumn than they had in the heat of summer. The trees lining the street had traded bright green leaves for shades of amber and gold, and the crisp morning air carried the quiet promise of change. I stood there for a moment before walking toward the building across the street that now bore a simple bronze sign. The Legacy Trust Initiative. Months earlier, I had imagined victory would feel loud. Instead, it arrived quietly. Justice rarely announces itself with celebration. More often, it arrives one document, one decision, and one honest act at a time. The foundation began with a single mission: helping families protect what generations before them had sacrificed to build. Too many people lost homes, savings, and inheritances because they trusted complicated promises instead of clear legal protections. I wanted to make sure fewer families experienced that kind of loss. Every Wednesday afternoon, our conference room filled with ordinary people carrying extraordinary stories. Grandparents worried about property deeds, young couples creating their first estate plans, adult children trying to untangle financial confusion left behind after losing a parent. Some arrived frightened, most left informed. Knowledge gave them something fear never could: choice. One afternoon, an elderly woman held both of my hands after we finished reviewing her family's paperwork. "I thought I was going to lose everything," she whispered. "You protected it," I replied gently. "You simply needed someone to explain how." She smiled through quiet tears before walking toward the elevator with her grandchildren beside her. Moments like that reminded me why this work mattered. Justice should never belong only to people who can afford it. Several former employees from the collapsed investment company also visited our offices during those first months. Independent investigations had uncovered enough financial misconduct for the courts to order restitution through the remaining corporate assets and insurance policies. Their recovered retirement funds could never erase the anxiety they had lived through, but they offered something equally valuable: a second chance. Watching them speak about future plans instead of past fears felt more meaningful than any courtroom victory. Life continued moving forward for everyone involved, not always in the direction they expected. My father no longer occupied the front row at charity banquets or business conferences. Invitations gradually stopped arriving. The same people who once praised his judgment quietly distanced themselves after learning how easily pride had clouded it. His greatest loss wasn't financial, it was credibility. My mother spent years believing control could preserve a family. Instead, it slowly emptied every room she tried to manage. People eventually grow tired of relationships built on guilt instead of love. Even my brother faced consequences he never imagined. Professional opportunities disappeared almost as quickly as they had appeared. Employers who once admired his confidence became uncomfortable with the headlines surrounding our family's collapse. Reputation, I learned, takes years to build and only moments to damage. As for the businessman who believed money could outrun accountability, the court reached its decision after months of testimony and evidence. The verdict was simple: guilty. The sentence carried prison time, financial penalties, and permanent professional disgrace. No dramatic speeches followed. No triumphant celebration waited outside the courthouse. The truth had already spoken. It didn't require my voice. People sometimes ask whether I ever forgave my family. The honest answer surprises them. Forgiveness was never the destination. Freedom was. The day I stopped measuring my worth by someone else's approval was the day they lost the power to define me. Looking back, I realized the greatest inheritance I received was never money, property, or legal authority. It was perspective. I finally understood that love offered only when you're useful is not love at all. If you're listening to my story today, I want to leave you with this. If your family only values you when you're useful, they never truly valued you. Build your own table, protect your own future, choose integrity over approval every single time. Silence is not weakness when it is guided by wisdom. Patience is not surrender when it is preparing for truth. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't taking anything away from the people who hurt you. It's building a life so honest, so peaceful, and so purposeful that their opinions no longer matter. Every July, a letter arrived carrying the weight of the past. But the greatest inheritance was never hidden inside an envelope. It was discovering that my worth had been mine all along.